Hello. Just apropos of nothing, out of all this dreadful news last week, I noticed that now they're trying to blame the prison guards for Jeffrey Epstein's death, which immediately brought to mind Macbeth, of course, and the fact that Macbeth and his wife cooked up a scenario whereby they killed Duncan, the king, and then sacrificed the king's bodyguards. Macbeth just stabbed them and said he'd flown into such a fury he'd killed them before they could spill the beans about the fact that he'd been in Duncan's room and done the deed himself. It's sort of an interesting parallel. However, that wasn't quite what I wanted to talk about. As a matter of fact, I want to talk about how our political class have turned into a class, and they are no longer what you might call servants of the public. They are our teachers, our mothers and fathers, our supervisors and our bosses. They're not our servants anymore, with a few exceptions, of course. I'm just talking about a general idea. Well, first of all, to return to Epstein just briefly, Tim Pool did a really good piece on the latest, that is today, which is Wednesday. Oh, for goodness sake. He did a good piece on the latest in the Epstein story. Epstein, whatever. And I'll put a link in the description. And there's nothing I can add about that because I don't have the sort of resources that Tim has. He's got far more feelers, researchers, and just general contacts than anything I could come up with. So I'm staying out of it. But what I can talk about is the way that so many people in authority, from politicians to the news media, don't seem to think that our outrage about the mess will actually count for anything. Yeah, there's something wrong. We know there's something wrong, but, well, the public knows there's something wrong, but the public can go hang. Like Epstein, I'm sorry to have to say. I'm going to tie this in with the behaviour of the President of France, that's Emmanuel Macron, and the behaviour of our own government over here in the United Kingdom, not only when Theresa May was Prime Minister, but also now with various members of Parliament ignoring the will of their constituents. And some even talking about, basically, the Labour Party have been talking about sort of kidnapping the Queen to achieve their political will. In fact, what's going on is that all over the world, in so-called democratic countries, various people in government have decided that the people are a dangerous impediment to good governance. This isn't new. In fact, throughout history, governments have always been of the opinion that they knew best. And generally speaking, it has something to do with what was best for them, but that's another matter. And they've always oppressed the politically impotent. You find me a system that hasn't. What went wrong was when governments started to be run by people who got the idea that they were doing a public service. This was fine as long as it lasted, but it turns out that it didn't last very long. And that's because there's a weakness in it, inherently in that system. Let's take an example of the British Empire. Now, that sound, by the way, is my husband slamming doors downstairs. Now, nobody would for a minute say that the British went into India for the good of the Indian people. No, they went in because they saw a trade opportunity. They didn't go in particularly to oppress the Indian people either. They just wanted to do trade, to get money, and they saw a way in. But bit by bit, they got more powerful until they had the sense that they ruled. Well, I'm actually talking only about India in this instance, so I'll stick to that. That they ruled India. Then something happened. They started to feel responsible for the Indian people. When they bullied them and acted badly, and they did act badly in many cases, although in many other cases they didn't. I have to say, the British built the Indian railway system. And when they left India, they left the Indian railway system. I understand that when the Portuguese left, what was it, Angola? They tore up all the railway tracks. Not nice. Anyway, they felt responsible for the Indian people when they got this idea. And the British press exposed their evil doings, saying this wasn't, well, gentlemanly behaviour or that sort of thing. They lost the idea that they were there to squeeze as much out of their trading arrangements as they could. They were there because they were shouldering what Rudyard Kipling referred to as the white man's burden. That is, it was the duty of the white peoples to carry Africans and Asians up the hill to the sunny uplands of democracy. Now, you might say, on the face of it, there's nothing wrong with Kipling believing that Britain and America could improve the world with their philanthropic political ambitions. But the problem is that as long as the British thought they were doing good instead of doing business, it weakened their resolve to exercise power on their own behalf. At least that's the way I see it. And they lost that will. And I'm not saying that's good, and I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just saying this is the way I see that situation. I can see the same thing developing with America with regard especially to the Latin states, or whatever you call them, in South America. Much of the democratic political focus is now on how much North America owes to South America, or even to Native Americans. And you can say each one of these arguments has its own justification. I don't know enough about the geopolitics to give a firm opinion on how much North America actually owes South America. All I can do is point out that this is what the British were doing by the end of the 19th century. And it was this hysteria about international obligations and this feeling that they were somehow responsible for the world, which is what got them involved in the First World War, for instance, with, as they say, hilarious consequences. And now in Britain, we play host to the world and offer free stuff to almost anyone who turns up. I have on many previous occasions said that President Trump is a huge, bombastic, orange ruffian, and in private life, I'm sure he is a huge bully as well. But, and that's a big but, he doesn't hold with this international policeman malarkey, and for that, I respect him. And that's because he's not a politician. He's a businessman. None of this noblesse oblige stuff. He's told Germany that it should stand on its own feet at long last, and he's told the United Nations to look to its finances and its charitable institutions. And he's, I hope, standing firm on American attitudes to South America. Again, I don't say he's always correct. And I don't say he's a nice man, but what I do say is that he's standing firm for America, which is, after all, his country, and that's his job, and he should be doing that. Now, back to how, for instance, the Democratic Party is behaving in the USA, deciding it knows best, and so many MPs in the UK who are coming right out and saying they don't care about the referendum because they know best. And President Macron in France sending out his police to beat up protesters because no doubt it's all for their own good. And this all happened because we've raised a class of career politicians who've all done the theory but never held a proper job. In Britain, there was an aristocratic class that formed most of the Conservative Party and the Liberal Party too. Then the Liberal Party spoiled everything by getting a conscience, really, and deciding that they had to overtax the landowners to pay for their social programmes. Now, the landowners stopped voting for them because it was pretty awful suddenly being zapped with all those taxes, and that gave the Labour Party the working class vote. Well, for a while that worked out quite well. The Labour Party MPs were supported by the unions and were generally the sort of people who had worked literally at the coalface before they'd gone into politics, and they knew what the world was all about, except from a different angle than the Conservatives, but still they knew about real life, so the political consensus was fairly reasonable. But bit by bit, as the composition of the members of Parliament tipped more and more into people who saw being an MP as their primary source of income, not their coming out of the working classes and telling government what it needed to hear about the plight of the working classes, not the landowning classes coming and telling the country how important landowning classes are. I'm not making an argument one way or the other here. I'm just saying that was their point of view. What we got instead was a single class of people from both sides who were circling about their own orbits. Slightly less in the Conservatives because many of them had and still have side jobs and, by the way, were roundly criticised for it by the left. And that's part of the reason why people feel this connection with the Brexit Party, for instance, because most of the people involved in that have come out of the world of business. As it is, the people in power are this single class. They may have different political aims, but they have similar educational backgrounds, similar political backgrounds. And it's a very dangerous time for all of us. And it's showing up in France, as I said, where Macron doesn't care that his citizens are being maimed and killed by his police and their police. The behaviour of the EU Remainers here in Britain, who don't care that a popular vote is telling them we don't want to stay. And then the Epstein business in the USA, where it seems that some people in politics, and I don't believe it's Trump, by the way, simply because it's on record that he hasn't had that much to do with Epstein and nothing at all for a pretty long time. Unlike several other American politicians I could name, but I won't because it'll get this channel pulled up again on some spurious strike or other. By the way, the one that got the copyright strike, I got the news yesterday that the copyright strike was upheld. So it's the second version and the version on BitChute that you should be looking at. Anyway, let's get back to the Epstein thing. Whoever is involved, they know that we know they're playing dirty, but they are so sure of their own positions, they don't care. And that's the problem. And that's a problem that we're seeing throughout the Western democratic world. It's very worrisome. Government is, instead of going forward, it's slipping back into an old system of the aristocrats, or whatever sort of aristocracy it is, and the peasants. Right, well, that's it. Click on like, it really does help with the algorithm. Then click on subscribe and then on the bell. Sometimes you may find your subscription has lapsed without your knowledge, so keep on checking that button. Thanks for listening. Please like and subscribe, and if you wish to donate, click the Subscribe Star link where you can make a one-off payment or set up a regular contribution, or I have a PayPal account at grannyopteryx@gmail.com. Till next time.